Well, the UN's human rights chief has labeled Russia's attacks on civilian infrastructure in Ukraine as cruel and a clear breach of the rules of warfare as temperatures there plunge below 0 degrees Celsius. Civilians are bearing the brunt, with the UN saying hundreds of thousands of families are living without heating. Let's go live now to Kyiv, where I'm joined by journalist Emmanuelle Chaze. Good to have you with us back on the program. Firstly, can you talk us through the energy infrastructure that were targeted by Russia?
Well, indeed, this was the energy infrastructure that was mainly targeted by Russia. And what is really crucial to know that some of those power plants, they are in the suburbs of Kyiv, and that means that when they are hit, first there's a danger of immediate death for people who live near those power plants, with air defense working, with missiles striking those power plants. And then there's a more insidious threat, and it is that of not being able to live normally in the winter conditions that we are experiencing in Kyiv. You were talking about temperatures below zero. They are well below zero. They are around -15 to -20 degrees, and this is going to last until at least the beginning of February. So there's really a wave of Arctic cold here in Ukraine, and 90% of people don't have access to electricity more than a couple of hours per day. There's half of the residential buildings in the capital which are deprived of heat. Also, I was talking to people on the left bank of the capital, as they are the worst affected by those strikes. They were telling me that they have 2 hours of electricity when they have any, and this is at night. So they just wake up to try and charge their electric devices, their batteries. They stay indoors with their coats on. So the situation is very dire. There has been, of course, an emergency response. We see mobile generators being deployed. There's around 50 in the capital, but of course the situation is very dire.
Yes, and I'm wondering, you are there in Kyiv as well, Emmanuelle. How are you yourself dealing with these extreme cold temperatures of -15, as you mentioned?
Well, you know, I have a passport. If things get really dire, I have the privilege of being able to leave the country, and the situation is much more dire for people in Kyiv who cannot leave, who cannot afford to go to relatives elsewhere in the country, who cannot afford to rent out a hotel room, for example. And this is why also the mayor of Kyiv, Vitali Klitschko, had asked after the strike of January 9th, because it's not just one strike, it is a campaign of strikes that has been unfolding. The mayor of Kyiv had asked people, residents here, to leave the city at least temporarily if they could. And today he actually said that at least 600,000 people had already taken the opportunity to temporarily leave their homes in light of what is unfolding in Kyiv.
Yes, and then from your perspective there, are Ukrainians and those in Kyiv expecting more strikes by Russia, despite what the UN is calling for them to cease immediately?
Absolutely, and Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, has actually warned the entire population of Ukraine of renewed strikes, not only on power plants, but also on substations of nuclear power plants that Ukraine has. So he warned against the increased risk for the population, not only to be a victim of those strikes directly, but also to have even less access to electricity, to energy. And also he warns of the imminent, of a looming danger of strikes on nuclear infrastructure here in Ukraine. And people here, you know, I've been talking to fellow Kyivans here, people who they have left to live in the countryside, to live with relatives in the western part of the country, in parts that are more sheltered. But ultimately, people here, they are experiencing not their first difficult winter here. They also know very well that Russia doesn't seem to have any intention to wind down those attacks, and people are determined to try and go through this winter regardless.
And of course, Ukraine does rely on nuclear power to provide much needed energy. Are there concerns when it comes to nuclear safety in the context of these more recent attacks?
There are concerns indeed, because when power plants and substations are no longer working, there are also the cooling stations at nuclear power plants that are no longer able to be activated and to function properly. This is already the case in Chernobyl nuclear power plants. It was the case temporarily in the illegally occupied nuclear power plant of Zaporizhia. The situation seems to have since resolved, but that's a recurring problem since 2022, that Russia threatens to bomb those facilities or threaten to bomb facilities nearby that are helping nuclear power plants to function properly. And that's really also a danger that Ukrainians are very much aware of.
Yes, and as all this is happening, both Russia and Ukraine are still negotiating with the US for a peace deal. What's happening on that front? Have there been any new developments?
Well, there's been some meetings carried out at the World Economic Forum between Ukraine and its allies, and separately between Russia and the US. But seen from the ground, indeed, there is no sign that Russia really wants to sit at the table of negotiations and really intends to commit to a peace, at least not in the immediate future. And the chief of the presidential administration, Kirill Budanov, said of those talks in Davos, in the World Economic Forum, he says he was cautiously optimistic that there were some advances, but that also, indeed, seen from the Ukrainian perspective, there is no sign of peace coming anytime soon here.
Okay, Emmanuelle Chaze in Kyiv, thanks very much for giving us that update, and do stay safe.
Thank you.